To hear your Assistant Mayor Joanna Kelly speak. When Joanna and I first met, there was a sense of rapport. There was a sense of resonance, that we both felt certain ways, knew certain things, had certain conviction that I know is not shared just by Joanna and me, but is shared not only by many people in this room, but I believe by millions and millions of people in America. But I think a lot of that conviction is something that many of us have felt for a long time we could just seek to express in our own individual lives. We felt that the toxicity of politics was something that we really didn't want to be part of too much, for the very reasons that Joanna said, that so much of what we have come to think of as the political establishment was somehow out of alignment with what our hearts knew to be true. But now I think many of us, and millions of us, have come to understand that by disengaging from politics, we've only allowed it to become more toxic. And the incidents that have occurred here at this place, in this beautiful environment, this town, this streets, this neighborhood where you least expect a swastika to be on the window, obviously that's a wake-up call for all of us. When I was doing this 4 years ago, there was a different feeling in the air. And the difference that I feel in the air between now and 4 years ago, I felt when I was in South Carolina earlier this week. I think 4 years ago, many of us felt that there was a malevolent factor in the country, but that if only we defeated that one malevolent factor at the ballot box, that we could sort of go back to being an okay country. I think today we realize it's more like a cancer that has metastasized, and we have a challenge in front of us which is up there with some of the biggest challenges that have ever confronted any generation of Americans. I think that we're very tempted to almost be paralyzed emotionally. Nobody quite knows what to do. And I think that I'd like to begin my remarks today by submitting to you that it's not just what we have to do, but what we have to understand and who we have to be. I've heard it said that you can live your life one of two ways. You can either live your life out of circumstances, or you can live your life out of a vision. And we need to reclaim in our collective experience as citizens, just like we claim in our own personal lives, the vision that we want to follow and that we want to see manifest and expressed in the world around us. I think in the last few years, for some reasons that are okay and for some reasons really that aren't okay, we have become exceedingly self-referenced. A lot of times that kind of self-reference has emerged from difficult economic circumstances, and there are other reasons as well. I don't think we need to do so much in terms of analyzing how we as individually got to a certain place of disengagement, as it is that now it's time for all of us to get together because, to put it bluntly, we need to save our democracy. I do think that there is a critical mass of Americans who do know that. I noticed when I gave a talk earlier today that people recognize the complexity of this moment. It's not as simple as some politician coming in here and saying, we need to do this, 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 and this. And as soon as we do this, this, and this, everything will be okay. I think things such as swastikas on the windows of people who are either black, gay, or Jewish tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the challenges that we have in front of us. But we have to dig deep, and this will not be solved just by doing certain things, but by changes that occur within ourselves as much as within the panoply of public policies that we concern ourselves with. I do want to start with talking about the places where I do think public policy, however, helped bring us to this place, and the changes in public policy that I think will be necessary in order to help us turn the page. Over the last 50 years, 48 specifically, there has been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion that has gone from 90% of Americans to 1% of Americans. I really want you to take a moment to take that in. That in over 48 years, $50 trillion has shifted. They call it, if you're being polite about it, a massive transfer of wealth. If you're being direct and blunt about it, a theft. A theft from 90% of Americans into 1%. And this has been accomplished through the economic policies, often called neoliberalism. It could be called trickle-down economics, hyper-capitalism. It's whatever you want to call it, but it's basically the idea that a corporation, instead of having to serve all of the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders in a business? It has to do with the owners of the business, but it also has to do with the workers in the business. It also has to do with the community that the business exists in. It also has to do with the environment that is affected by that business. There are many stakeholders. What happened in the 1980s, some people say it started happening in the 70s. We don't even have time for that level of in-the-weeds analysis. But it was the idea that all that a corporation owed was fiduciary or financial responsibility to the stockholders. So what that meant was that a lot of money would accrue to the people who bought stocks. Prior to the 1980s, stock buybacks were illegal. CEOs being paid with stock options was illegal. But back in the 1980s with the Reagan Revolution, no, it's like this concentration of wealth in the hands of the CEOs and the billionaire donor class and the stockholders. The idea was that this was supposed to be great for everybody. And the unbelievable canard that was created was that these stockholders would make so much money that they would create jobs. And it would be so great because then all that money would trickle down and it would lift all boats. Well, we all know, I think at this point, 40 years later, it's very clear. It did not lift all boats. It left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. And so this is where you get the fact that we have 68,000 people in this country who die every year from lack of health care. The fact that you have 1 in 4 Americans living in with medical debt. $88 billion worth of medical debt. You have 18 million Americans who cannot afford to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. Why is this? Because insurance companies don't want us to have universal health care because that would cut into their profits. Now, I want you to remember, as we have this conversation, that universal health care is granted as a moderate position and as a right within every other major democracy. But because of Big Pharma, there might be people here, or if there aren't people here, there are people that you know who ration their insulin. Yeah. This does not exist in other countries. You have that have universal health care. The fact that we have the kind of implosion in our environment, the fact you have the PFAS in New Hampshire. Why is it that we have all of these incredible transgressions upon our bodies, upon our pocketbooks, upon the very state of our democracy and of our health? Because we put the short-term profit maximization of huge multinational corporations before the safety and the health and the well-being of our people. We have today what is often called a corporatocracy, which is really the notion that huge corporations in our country have become an aristocracy, that we have reverted to a state of aristocracy. They are like what the landed gentry were in old England. But today, it's insurance companies, it's big pharmaceutical companies, it's big agricultural companies, it's big chemical companies, it's big food companies, it's gun manufacturers, and it is defense contractors of the proverbial military-industrial complex. They behave in a way that is aristocratic. It's called an oligarchy. It is the idea that the wealth that is generated, produced, and owned by the people, either of that CEO and donor class, or all of the corporations that they represent, somehow get to lord over the rest of us. They have their tentacles in every single aspect of American society. They have created a situation which is nothing short of corporate tyranny. Because of the money that these corporations and very wealthy individuals, by the way, I do want to say, this is not about nice people versus not nice people. This is about systems. We must not demonize individuals. That's not what's going on here. No socioeconomic group has a monopoly on moral values. This is not about individuals. This is about systems. Martin Luther King said we must conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must remember that. There is an human positivity that we must adhere to at the same time that we speak truth to power and call these systems on their malfeasance. The idea here, however, is that particularly because of Citizens United decision several years ago, which did allow these corporations to give an unlimited amount of money to political campaigns, because of other ways that money is now able to exert undue influence on our government, the government itself now acts as a kind of system of legalized bribery. The government should be holding those forces in their appropriate lane. The government should be regulating those forces. They have said for decades, oh, job-killing regulations, job-killing regulations. The deregulation is what's killing more than jobs, it's killing people. What they are, these are safety regulations, environmental regulations, regulations that protect workers, protect the right to unionize, and so forth. What is happening now is that government, in ways that it should be protecting us from the overreach of this kind of what is often called hyper-capitalism, instead of government protecting us and protecting our environment and protecting our communities in too many ways, and in too many cases, government is chopping the wood and carrying the water for the corporate tyrants. Now, we've been asking ourselves for many years, well, what are we going to do? Who do we have to vote for to make it okay? Is it going to be the Republicans or is it going to be the Democrats? Now, very clear here, I am a Democrat, but I grew up in a time when the Democrats were closer to the vision, still the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where there was an unabashed, unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States, making sure that the overreach of capitalism would be held in appropriate bay. Now, what happened now is that the Republican Party has now been owned completely, it seems, by the forces of corporate tyranny, and the Democratic Party, in too many cases, is trying to have it both ways. So the corporate Democrats, who are mainly in power within the Democratic Party today, they see the pain that people are in, and they try to do what they can. Try to do what they can on the periphery, right? Trying to help people survive this unjust system. Americans should not have to survive an unjust system. There should not be an unjust economic system that is lording over the American people. And so the corporate democratic agenda, which includes the one that we have now, does do what it can to help people survive an unjust economic system. I'm here today to say to you, Washington is divided into two main categories. We have this terrible economic anxiety and despair that is experienced by the majority of Americans. The majority of Americans. 64% of Americans still living paycheck to paycheck in the richest country in the world. 60% of Americans who cannot absorb an unexpected $400 expenditure in the richest country in the world. The 18 million I told you who can't fulfill their prescriptions. The fact that so many Americans are living, our seniors, half of them living on $25,000 and less a year, 12 million children who are hungry, 600,000 who are homeless in the richest country in the world. So Washington is filled with two basic categories of leaders. One, a group which does not care. Another group who, for whatever reason, God knows, we've given them enough opportunities, for whatever reason, with a few brave exceptions, such as Bernie Sanders and others, do not have the moral courage or the spine to get in there and fix it. I'm here today to say to you, let me in there. I will. Now, what they would tell you is that you cannot possibly make this choice because only they, they whose careers have been entrenched in driving the car that took us into this ditch, only they should be trusted to take us out of the ditch. But the problem in Washington has plenty of political car mechanics. That's not the problem. The problem is that we are on the wrong road. And so those who say that only one of them from that political class, which God knows has had enough opportunity over the last 50 years to turn this thing around, they would say that only they should be allowed to to be in any kind of serious leadership position in this system. And I say to you, my qualification is not that I know how to further effectuate or perpetuate that system. What I know how to do is disrupt that system. And the way to disrupt a field of lies is by laying down some truth. And so if you ask me, how do I do that? I'm starting here today. Can we be real and talk about what's happening in this country? That is where it all starts. You know, I come from a field. I have worked with people up close and personal for the last 40 years of my life, working with people whose lives are in trauma, whose lives are in crisis. And the conversation you must have is what's really happening here. How did you get here? Look in the mirror. How did you contribute to this? What's really going on here? And so I feel that I have a 40-year career that has trained me in some very important talents and skills involved in helping people and in helping systems both endure a time of crisis, but also transform the time of crisis. In order to do that, you have to start telling the truth. I understand about the factors we all do in this country that have no problem spewing lies, but too many times, even in my own party, people are willing to tell the truth, but they're not telling the whole truth, and they're not telling nothing but the truth, and that's what we need to get to. This country has to look in the mirror. This country has got to atone for our own mistakes. This country has got to be willing to own what it is that we need to own in order to move forward. If we do that, that will mean not just the government, not just our collective behavior, but starting with ourselves, including, and none of us should let ourselves off the hook. I have to say to you what we all know, we let it get this bad. We, the people of the United States, have been disengaged in ways that have allowed this creeping influence of basically, it's not just this corporate tyranny, but the societal dysfunction that inevitably emerges from that much human despair collectivized. When you have large groups of desperate people, it becomes a national security risk because it is a petri dish out of which all manner of societal dysfunction always occurs, whether it has to do with addiction, whether it has to do with depression, whether it has to do with suicide, or whether it has to do with ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, such as white supremacists, such as neo-fascists, such as some of the seriously dangerous neo-fascist authoritarian threats that are in our midst. Now, some people would say, you can't vote for Marianne Williamson because we got to beat Trump. And, excuse me, that's why I'm running. I am running because I do not believe that going to the American people in 2024 and saying, hey, the economy is doing well, is going to win in 2024 when that very message is contradictory to the visceral experience of the majority of Americans. So what I believe, and that's what, you know, it's interesting, a political campaign is a long job interview. I assume that you'll be interviewing this candidate perhaps more than once over the next few months, and that's the job of the primary states, and I'm really honored to have a chance to be part of the process. You get to know me, you get to know my consciousness, who I am as a person, and what I would do. So I want you to know what I would do. I would seek in every way possible to have this country make an economic U-turn. Not a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, an economic U-turn. We need the things which in every other advanced democracy the citizens can take for granted. We need universal health care. We need a complete cancellation of the college loan debt so people can get on with their lives, so that we can enter into the economy with the kind of infusion of capital that people deserve. Our young people should be aided in spreading their wings and becoming all that they can be, not thwarted in their effort to get ahead in their lives. We need tuition-free colleges and tech schools. Once again, every other advanced democracy. We need free child care. Once again, every other advanced democracy. We need paid family leave and sick pay guaranteed as in every other advanced democracy. And we need a guaranteed living wage as in every other advanced democracy. The people who tell you it can't happen say, oh, don't listen to her. You don't understand. It's complicated. And I'm here to tell you, don't listen to them. It's not complicated. It's corrupt. Is corrupt. Is corrupt. The only reason we don't have those things is because of the undue influence of insurance companies, of pharmaceutical companies, of the entire panoply of corporate masters that have far too much power in America today. Should people be able to make money? Absolutely. This isn't about people not being able to make money. It's good for people to make money. The problem in America today is not enough people ever get a chance to make money. Not enough people get into the club. If you live in the club in America, there's a great country. The club means the 20% of Americans for whom the economy is basically okay. The problem is that 20% live on this enchanted economic island that is surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. Out of that, that's where your danger comes from, is that vast sea of economic despair. That's where the danger to people's bodies, that's the danger to people's souls, that's the danger to people's mental health, etc. I've been saying to politicians forever who've come to me and asked me if I have any ideas about what we should do about the mental health crisis. I can't tell you how many politicians to whom I've responded, why don't you try to maybe not drive everybody crazy all the time? That might help. And so I believe, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, that we need more than the alleviation of stress. We need fundamental economic reform. But we must do that very carefully. We must have a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, a just transition from a war economy to a peace economy, a just transition from dirty energy to clean energy. What does that mean? That means you have to take care of people. You have to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks. You have to make sure that people whose livelihood depends on working for industries that represent the old order don't just fall away, but they too have a place. This needs to be done carefully. But it's like everything else in life. When it's time for certain changes to be made, your only choice is between making it wisely and carefully or having certain changes thrust upon you. I can't imagine that anybody living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and seeing swastikas on the window of a coffee shop owned by an African American, no one can any longer deny that we have problems that run deeper than we have even allowed ourselves in circumstances to look to. But I remind you that this country responded to slavery with abolition. Generation rose up and did that. This country responded to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement. A generation rose up and did that. This country responded to segregation with the civil rights movement. A generation rose up and did that. And I must say, if you actually take a look at American history, what we're dealing with is no different than what those generations were dealing with. The forces within our country that have been here in every single generation that have said, forget all this, all men are created equal thing. Forget all this. Government is here to guarantee life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. Forget all that. We, usually they, for their own economic purposes, are not interested in seeing those principles actualized and have proven in many violent ways that they will do whatever it takes to make sure they are not. Our ancestors rose up and said enough is enough. And those ancestors who rose up and said enough is enough, by the way, many of them when it comes to slavery from New Hampshire, from the earliest evangelical churches in New Hampshire, from senators and political leaders in New Hampshire. That's quite a tradition you have here. They did not necessarily emerge from the political parties. They emerged from the people. And then the political parties became the conduit. It is simply our turn. This entire story, this iteration, this struggle between these enlightened principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness versus those forces which would diminish and suppress them. It is simply our turn. It is our turn now. And in order for us to live in honor of our ancestors and in true devotion to our children and to our descendants, it is time for us to do what other generations have done before us. It is unacceptable what is happening. It is intolerable what is happening. We've had enough with what is happening. We the people, we have the power. We're getting in there. This stuff needs to stop. And let's do it with love. Let's do it with justice, and let's do it with love. But I'll tell you something. Joanna was telling me that when the swastikas were painted on the buildings and on the businesses that represented, whether it was gay, Jewish, black, whatever it is that the white supremacists hate, that this country, this city, you said, responded with flowers. And that's so important, the response. At a time when hatred is so loud, love cannot afford to whisper. Send in a woman with love, and I promise you, I will not whisper. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. I so look forward to answering any questions that you have. People ask and make comments, and we'll talk about the greater specifics to whatever extent you would like. Is that right? Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay. So please let me know if you have any questions or any comments that you would like to make.
I got a question.
Yes.
So, as someone who grew up in New Hampshire and a creative, I felt like there definitely wasn't enough here, and I feel like so many of my friends are left here with nothing. Like you said, we're working 3 jobs, but none of them are the jobs that we want to work. And when we see an economy moving towards, like my son said earlier, these AIs, how are we going to shift and put in places where if that comes in place, we're going to live our dreams and still bring in capital to feed our families?
What we need is a 21st century economic bill of rights. You know, in both the lives of Abraham Lincoln and the life of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, both of those men were, at the time of their deaths, busy at work with planning what was going to happen, quote unquote, once the war was over. And President Roosevelt had asked the American people, what do you want? They said, we want free health care. They said, we want education for all. They said that they wanted these things that now constitute the great unfinished work that still remains before us. When you have a guaranteed living wage, what does that mean? What does an economic bill of rights mean? It means that everyone who wants to work should be able to work. This is one of the core principles of the Green New Deal. What the Green New Deal says is that there is an extraordinary amount of work that will be available when we initiate the season of repair, the new beginning in this country. As we cut the cord with the aberrational chapter of American history that is represented by neoliberalism or trickle-down economics, we will have, there are millions of jobs that will be created when we get about the work, not just serving the economic bottom line of huge corporations, but the humanitarian bottom lines involved with repairing our country. There are millions of jobs. Now, this is exactly what the forces of the extreme right wing don't want. They don't like the idea of the government being involved in job creation. That is what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did. That is what would happen and will happen with the Green New Deal. But once again, it is we the people. And once again, I remind you, this is New Hampshire. If a new conversation, and I felt the same way when I was in South Carolina, these 2 states, there's a lot of stuff going on with these 2 states about what's happening, but with the Democratic primary schedule, but the states themselves are not in competition with each other. One of the things that you share in New Hampshire and South Carolina is you, and I mean you literally. You literally will determine what conversation dominates this presidential cycle and what a conversation then dominates the next period of our chapter. So for you to say, oh, we've heard all that nonsense about socialism and all the things that are supposed to scare us, you're not supposed to die for capitalism, okay? You're not supposed to, that's not what's supposed to happen. Capitalism has lost its ethical center, and it must be reclaimed. Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said it cannot exist outside an ethical center. You know, you had the CEO of Norfolk Southern actually testifying before Congress today about the unwillingness of the company to take care of all of the medical bills of all of the people whose health it is reasonable to assume will be harmed by what happened in that train derailment. So we simply put this country back to work. And that can happen when you unleash the true spirit and allow there to be the kind of positive public-private partnerships that are possible. Yeah. By the way, but they would say, oh no, unemployment's so down. But we must remember, yes, it's a very good thing that unemployment is down. But much of those jobs, first of all, many of those jobs are jobs that came back after the pandemic. Many of those jobs do not pay a living wage. We have 1/3 of Americans who live on less than $15 an hour and can't find a place to live. So there's more to those numbers around low unemployment. Number one, how many of them pay a minimum wage, and even the minimum wage, as we know, is not nearly enough. And also how many of those jobs are jobs that people cannot live on. They have to live on 2 or 3 in order to survive. Yes, sir.
Hi. I work for Starbucks, and one of the things going on in the company right now, you have 2 things. One, a large, unprecedented union-busting campaign, which is affecting the lives of millions of people trying to stand up for their rights. A lot of baristas just want a living wage. We want, better benefits. We want health care. We want the ability to enhance the culture of Starbucks. And unfortunately, we're seeing this corporate washing, hour-cutting system that's preventing a lot of people from getting the hours they need to survive, from getting the wages they need to survive. And a lot of people are losing their jobs. They're losing their homes. They're scared to speak up for those of us who do want rights. So how can we progress as a nation, not just Starbucks, but as a nation, in order to ensure those who wish to unionize may unionize, and those who wish to have a living wage may have a living wage, and those people don't have to live in fear of losing their jobs, of not paying their bills, of not losing their homes, of not losing their health insurance.
So when this entire thing started about 40, 50 years ago, one of the ways that this transfer of wealth was created was by demonizing and suppressing unions. And so what's happening now is this resurgence of people such as this young man who are recognizing the importance of unions in order to protect the rights of the average American. Now, what's happening is that we have a class and a culture of union busters, and Howard Schultz at Amazon is a particular example of the Gilded Age characters who is engaging in union busting as we speak. How great is Bernie Sanders in saying we need to subpoena this guy and have him speak before Congress?
March 29!
Okay, but to be honest, you need a president, not just someone in the Senate. You need a president who's saying, Howard Schultz, we're coming after you. You're not going to get to union bust like that. Okay. We need a president who's going to say, Jeff Bezos, we're not going to allow union busters like you to do what you do. And one of the first things I would do as president is cancel all government contracts with union busters. And this president has said that this government would not have contracts with union busting companies. Look at the government contracts with Amazon and so forth. I don't know how you have a Democratic president, much less a president who said he's so pro-labor, that is actually siding with the railroad companies against the interests of the railroad workers who want nothing more than sick pay. Right. This is obscene. And so it's so important. It is inspiring, first of all, particularly to see the young people, Christian Smalls, to see Sarah Nelson, to see Max Alvarez, to see all those people who do represent this new generation of unions. You know, when I was a kid, my parents always told us, if you ever cross a picket line, don't bother to come home. But I have been amazed over the last few years at some of my friends. I remember several years ago, it was probably a couple decades ago, we went somewhere and there was a picket line, and I said to the woman who was with me, we were in a car, I remember I said, oh, we can't go there, there's a picket line. And she said, oh, that's okay, we can just sort of go around it. It was like, whoa. Whoa, and that was my first exposure to the fact that it was no longer in common parlance that you must respect it. Now, I want to remind you also that in the 1970s, the average worker did have decent benefits. In the 1970s, the average worker could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford to take a yearly vacation, and could afford to send their kids to college. That was in the 1970s. So the diminishment of the power of unions is one of the factors involved in the fact that the average working American no longer has the life and the lifestyle and the ability to spread their wings the way generations before us did. So in me, you would have a president who said, Howard Schultz, why don't you come over to the Oval Office? Maybe we could talk for a few minutes. And the American people would know that. You know, one of the things, I don't think he'd take me up on my offer, by the way, but he would know, and I would use the bully pulpit to make sure. What you need is more people, such as what Bernie Sanders is doing, saying he is willing to subpoena. But I'll tell you something. You need a president who will say, I want Congress to subpoena the CEOs of not only the union-busting companies, but every company that is now price gouging the American people. That has to do with big food, has to do with the food companies, the inflation, the fact that people can't buy food. This has to do with the food companies, the meat packing, the agricultural companies, the airlines, and all of them. It's time to stop pussyfooting around with this. And by the way, many of these people know what they're doing and are kind of surprised they haven't been called out before now. And by the way, as I was saying to a gentleman on a plane the other day, very nice man, actually, was making it clear to me. You know, he clearly was a master of the universe type. He was a really nice guy. I could also tell that he was very involved in his city. I don't know how he votes, but he certainly was a concerned American and understands what's really going on. I said to him, I was talking about a wealth tax. I was talking about people at the highest ends of our income ladder paying fair share of their taxes. You know, in 2017, under President Trump, they passed a $2 trillion tax cut, and 83 cents of every dollar went to the top earners and the richest corporations. What was good about that, and they were very smart, because they also put a middle-class tax cut in there. So we need to repeal that, but we need to put back in the middle-class tax cut. We need to have a wealth tax where people over $50 million in assets do pay an additional 2%. People of $1 billion in asset pay additional 1%. But one of the things that happened in my conversation with that gentleman was I looked at him and I said, can we be honest? You wouldn't even feel it. It would never affect your day. And he said, you're right. That's what's so hideous about this. That is what is so wrong about this. We are talking about people for whom a fair tax burden would not even affect their lives in the slightest, whereas those shifts, whether it has to do with taxes or the end of corporate subsidies or anything else, would literally make the difference between whether or not somebody could live a life unshackled by the invisible economic chains that are held around far too many people. So, congratulations to you, sir, and I hope, I'm sure, I assume I speak for everybody in this room for saying go Starbucks, go with this new wave of unionization going on in this country, and people are watching, and you're doing a beautiful job, and I wish you the best. I do know something you said, it's a war of attrition, and Schultz is making it very difficult. I hope Bernie is able to get him to speak before Congress, and I hope he is held into account. This is pure union busting, and theoretically it is illegal. Who's next? Anybody? Did somebody say you had something to say over there? So what do you think, everybody? You think I should run for president?
Yeah.
Thank you. I will say this. Obviously, the institutional power is with that other guy, that very nice man. I have no interest in any kind of personal pot shots at the president. But his candidacy is, first of all, I hope he will come here, and I hope he will debate me, and I hope that you, the citizens of New Hampshire, will make sure that he gets that message. I'm not naive. I've done this before. I didn't enter into this thinking that it would be easy. I didn't enter into it not expecting the kind of smear tactics that are already being thrown at me. It is, to a certain extent, like running into a burning building, but you, the people who might see things the way I do, are my fire retardant. And I am requesting your support. If you feel that my voice is an element that should be present, and particularly if you feel that the kind of ideas that I represent actually should make their way into the White House, I ask that you will support me. This is a kind of insurgent campaign in that sense, correct? Because there's no way we're ever going to have the kind of institutional power that is represented by the corporatist machine. But what we have is a feeling of passion in our hearts. It's the same passion that our ancestors felt. There's this kind of fire that burns blazing in the hearts of those of us who feel that the very idea of a country in which everybody, if they work hard enough, should have a shot, that blazes inside us, and we are willing to conduct that struggle on that high plane of dignity and discipline. If that's the truth, I sure hope you'll help me. I sure hope, and I'm going to introduce you in a moment to my to my state director, Carlos Cardona. He will ask for your email. He will ask if if it's comfortable for you for your donations. He will ask you to get on social media, tell your friends about where I'm going to be this week to help build this campaign so that it cannot be invisibilized. It cannot be just, in a patronizing, condescending, paternalistic way, made to appear like we need to sit down because the grown-ups are in charge. The grown-ups are in charge. Are you kidding me? We are 6 inches from the cliff. And these grown-ups, among other things, a grown-up does not knowingly allow a child to go hungry. Like I said, let me in that house and you're going to see some changes, and I believe with all my heart you would like them. Thank you very, very much.